Hello, good evening. It probably is evening now. It's pitch black outside virtually. And welcome to a Ferndale Live for late October, properly autumn now. And although this is a really tricky time for many people, just remember how much fun you've had in your garden this year, and don't let that stop. There's loads of things we can do and talk about, and I will pick up on some of those this evening. So autumn is only about going out with the right clothes on. As long as even when it's raining, you can garden, as long as it's not too sticky and wet. So get the right layers on. You'll soon get a bit of a fog going, and you'll need to strip the layers off as you get going. Good exercise, great to get outside, get away from the news. That's got to be something for all of us. So don't neglect this time of year. It's still great for planting, and we'll touch on a few things. Great research been coming out over the last 10 to 15 years, letting us know that being outside in the fresh air, being in with nature, and gardening are just so good for us. And at a time when we need to get our mental well-being up and perfect, and certainly improved on what it is at the moment, then this is definitely a time to stay in the garden. So what we're going to talk about tonight, some topics I've got to run with are what to do with your front gardens, because that can be a great way of cheering you up when you come in. Loads of leaves everywhere, especially if you're living in Sheffield. There's so many trees in Sheffield, even though the news would say there isn't. So many trees, so many leaves, and I'll bring into that lawns, because the leaves on the lawns aren't good, and your ponds and so on. We'll touch on later on some planting in your autumn garden, why it's so good. And also I'm going to finish off with what I've called houseplants for lockdown 2.0, because whatever you like, whatever you think, if you're in a tier 2 or tier 3, which we are in the Sheffield region, then it's going to put some restrictions on us. But you can still grow houseplants, still have some fun, and we'll get going from there. So let's talk about front gardens. The really important part about front gardens in the winter and in the autumn and then into early spring is that's probably the only bit of gardening most of us will see on a regular basis. So make your front garden something really welcoming. That's the word I'm trying to find. But also use your front doorstep as something with lots of colour. So it's a bit mad to bring all these things into my pretend potting shed. But imagine that in a pot, in a tub on your patio. That will continue to flower most of the winter, if not all of it. Fully hardy, slightly trailing this cool wave variety. But these are already done in these special trays where you just drop them straight into a pot or even into a hanging basket, and you can instantly turn your front doorstep into something really pretty. And the great thing about the viola pansies is that actually cope with quite a lot of shade. The real secret to gardening at this time of year is to make sure that you're doing lots of little projects. If you're going to try and use the garden and growing as a place to improve your mental health, set yourself up some little projects. Replanting your summer baskets is a great one. Replanting your summer pots, putting bulbs in pots. You don't have to do it all in one session. Just pop out regularly and do stuff when it's dry and light. If you've got good spotlights, you could do it in the evening, even if it's dark. Many houses have got those nowadays. And if you can't actually plant your own things, then there's lots of ready planted plants in here. Now, let me just give you, I've used this to try and give you an example of some of the plants that could be in a container. So we've got, I'm going to get this the right way around. So we've got here the violas and the pansies that I was talking about. Winter flowering pansies, exceptionally good through the winter. They keep reflowering. This is heuchera here. So it's a herbaceous plant that actually has, it's called coral bells as another name. Lots of flowers on in the spring. And but it's really good for foliage. So you've got purple ones, you've got various lilac-y coloured ones as well. These semi-hardy cyclamen, the autumn cyclamen, which they are running out actually because they've been so popular this year, may not get all the way through the winter, and usually it's the wet that causes them a problem. The wet gets right down inside and they rot. But they are actually amazingly hardy. So if you're using them, put them in a place where they're not going to get hammered by the rain and be continually soaking wet. But like in our house, the front door faces west. And that sounds bad, but we've got loads of trees around us. And even without the leaves, it doesn't get hammered with rain. But a great, so perky, great on window boxes. You can put them on cold windowsills inside. This is a euonymus. Lots of small evergreens you can put in there. They're shrubs normally, but just growing for the winter. They're fantastic. You can plant them out afterwards. And then there's lots of semi-evergreen or evergreen grasses that you can put into pots as well. So lots of different things you can put in together. Buy them ready made, or you can do your own if you want a project. Another little project. I'm just going to bring up the comments so I can see what you're saying. The project is you can get kits of basket plants, and in this case it's a herb selection with 6 plants in there. A bit of foliage, but a bit of scent. You can't actually eat the Santa here, but it's got great scent. Got sage in this one, thyme, some pennyroyal, and what's that one at the back there? A bit of mint. Yeah, definitely mint. Put those together as a project, nice little pot. Just start thinking, when you go into a garden centre or a nursery, have a look at the things you might pull together as an activity. And you might say to yourself, isn't this going to be expensive? Well, it's probably the same price as drinking and probably a lot better for you. So look at something like that. There's lots of kits around. You can even get build your own. I think they're aimed at kids really, but why should the kids have all the fun? Build your own bug hotels, which can go up now as the insects try and find somewhere for the winter. Paint your own bird boxes, all those sorts of things. Lots of kits and so on to play around with. Let's shift some of these out of the way. So I'll talk about how we're going to go to. Oh, let's talk about leaves next. I've got some shrubs and things here to talk about. Sue has asked, I'll put a question. There we go. I have a hydrangea. It's not doing very well where it is. What's the best time to move it, please? Well, if it's not too old, so I'd say 3 to 4 years would be, once you get to 5 years, possibly getting too old. Anytime once the leaves start to fall off. Now, the last few years, because the autumns have been longer and the winters have been shorter, really, they often hold on to the leaves till very late and may still have leaves on in December. But from about mid-November all the way to about mid-March, you could move those quite successfully. That's good timing to ask that question, because this is the best time of year for planting or even moving younger hardy plants. And we tend to look at the weather and the weather forecast particularly, and we might say it's not worth gardening, it's too cold. We feel the cold, so that's why I say we should put more layers on. But from a plant point of view, the roots in plants continue to grow. So if you take a plant like this that's virtually lost its leaves, the root ball will continue to grow. So you can see there's quite a lot of new roots there. The big advantage of that to us is that if you plant at this time of year or replant at this time of year, those roots will start to grow even though the tops have lost all their leaves. That means you get stronger plants next year, you have less watering next year. And it's actually the best time for planting. You don't have to water so often, simply because it's going to rain more often than it would do in the spring. You may have to do some watering next year, but less likely because the plant's got established. This is a very interesting plant. It's just finished with its leaves falling off, and it's got a terrible name. Look at that name. Try and get that up there. Oh, it's not going to focus, is it? So there we go. Cercidiphyllum japonicum. Now, what's really good is the best thing about this, and it's really strange, these leaves smell of candy floss. It's absolutely bizarre, but it has the most amazing autumn color. So definitely a plant worth thinking of. This is a fairly small one. You can grow it as a bush. You can get it as a small tree. Looks beautiful during the year because the leaves are sort of a little bit heart-shaped. And but this is incredible. You walk into the garden when the leaves are just starting to turn color and dry up, and you can smell candy floss. Now it's a bit weird here at the moment because just down the road, and you may even hear some beats from it, there's a circus and they sell candy floss down there. So let's just put Tim's question up. Tim asks, when do you cut back rhubarb? Actually, you don't have to cut it back. It will literally just collapse on its own. Frost will get to the stems. It's actually really chilly tonight, and although I don't think they forecast properly a frost, unless it's changed since I came to work, it does feel cold. So in the next few weeks, the tops will die back. They will rot on their own. You can chop them back as they do that, and you're away. So no worries about that one. And Ruccio, I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong. Can you sow pumpkin seeds indoors in autumn? I wouldn't, because they'll get too big and you're going to have a problem with it. So best time to sow those would literally be April next year, and they're not frost hardy, so it would be very difficult to grow them now. Even with a heated greenhouse, it would be very difficult. But if you sow them at the beginning of April next year, they can go straight into the garden in early to mid-May, and then you get this nice long growing period. If you've got a heated greenhouse, you can sow them earlier, and that will make sure the plants are bigger when they go out. But you still can't plant them out until about May. But there's not many things you can be sowing now that you can eat during the winter or into early spring, but you can still put in the autumn planted onion sets. They're very good because you get onions around June, whereas normally you have to wait till August, September for them. And it means you can get another crop in behind. They're in stock at the moment all over the place. We've got them. Don't miss out on those. But indoor food, the only thing you can do at this time of year, and particularly if you've got a bit of extra lighting, plant lighting, these salad leaves is probably some of the best things you can grow, and you can just keep chopping them off and re-sowing them. Micro veg is really interesting. Really was developed for the restaurant industry, and it is literally seeds that are sown of radishes and cabbages and various other salady crops, but they chop them and cut them while they're still seedlings. So you remember doing cress at school? It's that. When the size of the cress, you chop it like that. What's really interesting, they're absolutely packed with nutrients, because in the seed, the seed has got everything it needs to boost and get the plant growing. So that transfers very quickly into the micro veg. So you can sow those throughout the winter on the windowsill and use them as garnish and as extra crops. I'd actually think it's time to start a whole greenhouse revival in the UK. I'll mention this a couple of times on these live broadcasts, because simply when I grew up, my grandfather had a greenhouse. Everybody who came through the Second World War built themselves a greenhouse or had a greenhouse because they extended the season so well. So they were starting things earlier. They could grow grow things like tomatoes for a longer period, both in the spring, but also right through to this time of year. So definitely worth thinking about putting a greenhouse up. And there are some good modern ones. The question from Helen here: it's the best time to prune a plum tree? Well, it might just be too late. The best time is when the leaves are on. If there's no signs of the leaves falling off yet, you just about can get away with it. If you do it too early, if you do it in the winter, there's a disease that gets into the plant called silver leaf, and actually the leaves look like they've gone silver. And what's happened is the disease separates the waxy surface from the green bit underneath. So what you can see is air in between, and that will eventually kill. It'll certainly weaken, and then it'll kill the plum. So try and do it when the leaves are fully on there, and don't do it in the winter. Now, if it's a fairly young plant and you've got those very long whippy growths, what the Victorians discovered, and it's been reintroduced in the last 20 years, is if you bend them down, so instead of letting them go straight up, a bit like this shrub is, that's a good example here. So plums grow very upright, much like this is here. Where shall I put this? But if you can get the branches and do that while they're young and weight them down, so there's two ways of doing that. You can tie some string to the end and peg them down like you were putting a tent up, or the Victorians had special lead weights and clips that went on the end. But the way we can do it is something like an old pair of tights, or the nets that you get lemons in, those sort of things. Put some stones in the end, fasten them to the end of the branches, and they hang down like that. The advantage of the weights over the string is that they can move better in the wind. What happens is they set like that, and then I'm going to show you this all the way along this section here. That promotes those buds into fruiting buds and stops all this upright growth. So you get less growth, get more flowers, and the plant stays lower and easier to pick. Also, and you can see it very much in this shrub, it doesn't apply here because we haven't got any problems with fruit. If I can get to the right, you see that how narrow these joints are. Put it against the back of my shed there. If that was a plum, if that was full of fruit up there, what would happen is that would snap off during the growing season. So you end up with broken branches, fruit falling all over the place, and damage to the tree. So if you do the bending system and can get, particularly when they're young, you get them set, you'll open those joints up, you get less damage, you'll get more fruit, and that's what you want, isn't it? Hopefully that helps, Helen. Thanks for your question. So one of the things that we've talked about leaves, I talked about the ones that smell like candy floss, which is very nice, is that the leaves have fallen, and we've not had much strong wind. Now they're forecasting a little bit of wind over the next few days, but when the wind's not very strong, the leaves literally come down. If it rains, they start to clog up. You must get the leaves off the lawn. If you get your lawn covered with the leaves, it will kill the grass. And you can literally, within 4 or 5 days, go scrape any patches of leaves off, and you'll see the grass is already turning yellow. Once you start getting patches, then the weeds get in, the moss can spread in, and you'll have loads of work to do next spring. So although you might go, oh, can't be bothered, trust me, you'll have more. It'll be a lot easier to look after it now. You can get blowers to blow them off, or if you've got a compost heap, and you should always have a compost heap or a compost bin, set your lawnmower, set the blades much higher than normal for this time of year, which is what you would do. You'd set them high now, and if you should be collecting the grass anyway. If you run over the leaves and the grass together, they both get chopped up together. That is the perfect combination for composting, and it makes really good compost. And if through the year you can also make sure that you're picking up the little red worms and throwing those into a compost heap, they will continue to eat them all through the winter, even when it's cold. And they actually breed in the compost bin. If you go fishing, you can have a supply of little red worms for fishing as well. But definitely that's the way. Mow the lawn, tip the grass. It'll chop the top off. I mean, we've had the grass cut again here today. It'll need it again next week, I think, because it's still growing. But if it gets chopped up with the leaves, with the grass, it's the perfect mixture for composting. When you're doing lawns as well, just make sure that you can still feed at this time of year. You can get these nice autumn feeds that are slow feeding, but also some of them have moss killers in. Most of those that have moss killers in, the lawn goes black and looks terrible. Then you need to scrape it out. And you can still sow grass seed at this stage. So feel free to sow grass seed, because it literally will germinate in the next few weeks. You haven't got to water it, and it will give you a really good lawn for next year. So, well, we've some questions here. There's one here from Claire. How long should we keep our pumpkins growing? And she sent me some pictures separately, because we happen to know each other fairly well, Claire and I. They probably, if they're pumpkins, they probably want to be brought in now, and you'll see people on Facebook and social media showing pictures of them going and cutting pumpkins for the normal end of October activities. But if you're going to use them, if you pick them up, any of these sort of big bulbous fruit like marrows, and if you tap them, there should be a bit of a ring to them. They should be pretty ripe by now. If they're not, put them on a windowsill, and you should start to get a bit of a smell off them as they ripen, just a nice pumpkin-y smell. But you can also, obviously, with pumpkins, cut holes out of them and carve them and put candles in them and so on. So yeah, about now would be right. And then you can compost the remaining green stuff, put it in your compost bin. Let's have a look. Caroline asks here, I have a perennial sweet pea. Is it best in a tub or in the garden? They can get a bit rampant in the garden. So just be aware of that. So it may be in your garden, it's best in a tub, but it doesn't matter. You can grow it in both. And if you've got it in the garden now, you can move it, and it'll be fine from about now. Once the leaves die back as well, because the perennial sweet pea, the tops completely die down, leaves you with a root. So remember where it is. You can dig the root up once it's gone dormant and transfer it. They don't have such nice flowers as the annual sweet peas, and they're not really as scented, but they are very colourful and very powerful. So I hope that answers your question there, Caroline. Thanks for asking it. I mentioned that autumn planting is so good, and the colour this year is really good. So if you're going to think, if you've been doing lots in your garden this year, the thing to do now is, on a lovely day like it was this afternoon, is stand in the house and look out of the window at the places you're most likely to look from at this time of year. So it might be a chair next to a patio window, or looking over a windowsill, or it might be the kitchen window that you're looking out of. And look at those places and see if you think they're bright enough for this time of year. What could you put in there? So you could put in bulbs to come up in spring. You could be putting winter pansies in. You could be putting evergreens in, or you could be putting in one or two perennials that lose their leaves, deciduous bushes that have fantastic autumn colour. So in a shelter garden, acers are one of the best autumn colour plants. There's also a native plant, but a new compact form of it, called Euonymus alatus, which has the most incredible red leaves at the moment, and they've been red for some weeks, and they're pretty much stuck on the plant at the moment, so that's good. So don't neglect this time for planting. Really still a good time for putting bulbs in. If you don't know how to choose them, then there's lots of bags around now where they're ready done, and these are good where they've put the color theme together, so you can put them in a pot, or you could plant them amongst other plants and just let them come up together. They're actually in separate bags, and it'll tell you which is which in there, and it gives you all the heights on the pack. So look out for those. Not many bulbs left this year, because simply everyone's got into their gardens this year, and bulbs have died down sold very quickly. I've just had a question from this is an in family joke, this one. Why did our cactus die? And was it COVID? No, it wasn't, James, even though both you and Claire have had it. The reason that your cactus died was you overwatered it, which brings me to, thank you, you didn't know I was going to do this, my basket of houseplants. A little bit, yeah, spot on timing as well. Let me just bring these out so we can talk about them. Houseplants in the winter are really quite difficult sometimes, and I'll explain why in a minute. Ooh, I didn't want to do that. That was a cactus. Right. Bring out the orchid and the bonsai. Right. Here we go. So let's talk about cactus. Here's one here. This one, weirdly, is starting to flower, which it shouldn't do at this time of year, but it is starting to flower. Cactus, the best thing to do when you get a houseplant is to go on Wikipedia and find out where it comes from. So cactus come from desert conditions. It's probably the one plant everybody knows where they come from. So what are the characteristics of the desert? The desert is bone dry for most of the year, but then it rains suddenly. So you get the desert blooming, which you may have heard of, is actually the rain falling on the desert. Everything comes into flower. It seeds as quickly as it can, simply because it's got to get its life cycle through, produce its seeds and shed them before it gets bone dry. In the UK, these are not hardy. And what they really hate is the wet. So from about the middle of September to the middle of March, don't water them. No water at all. Absolutely bone dry. And this one's quite dry in the pot and quite loose. It's absolutely fine. It doesn't mind. This is what it's designed for. If you go from the August period where we're watering things quite regularly into this period now and carry on at the watering at the same rate, it's almost certain you will overwater your cactus and they die. And I'm afraid it wasn't COVID that killed yours, James and Claire. It probably overwatering. So this is a succulent. This is actually a type of Mother-in-law's Lord's Tongue. It's a new variety, a little bit on the more expensive side because that's £10 for the little plant, but most unusual colour. Succulents need a little bit more water than cactus in the winter, but very little. So you might only water it once or twice. Think of the desert. When it rains once and dries out. That's how to water cactus and succulents. Water them, leave them to go dry. Now, on the opposite end of that is things like the orchids. Now, some of these amazing, unusual orchids, which you don't see as often, but are definitely worth having a go at. Orchids are from the tropical rainforest, and the characteristics there are that it's rains regularly and it's very humid. So whereas cactus like it dry and hot and sunny, particularly in the winter, same with succulents, orchids like a bit of shade and they like the humidity. So they don't necessarily go together. Our winter houses are often very dry because we've got the central heating on. So the best place for orchids would be the kitchen or even in the bathroom, if you can do that. But orchid flowers last for weeks and weeks and weeks. So that's the most amazing thing about them. If you start getting aerial roots at the top, don't worry about them because that's actually how they absorb moisture in the tropical rainforest. They don't need potting very often. And just a tip on repotting, don't do any repotting in the winter. Again, this is about watering. If you repot and you put the new compost in and you go into a bigger pot, if you go into a bigger pot, the likelihood is you'll go up to the next size. So the next size on this is a 12 centimeter pot. The next size is 13 centimeters. So it's only that wide, but the volume and the pot's much deeper. So, but the volume could be twice as much as that size pot. And that cold compost in the winter, at this time of year, if it's wet and cold, it will damage the roots that are there, and then the plant starts to rot. So if you've got things that need replanting, repotting rather. Leave it till April and the plants will romp away. If it's falling over because it's top heavy, just stand it in a pot cover and just wedge it with something. But my advice is not to water in winter. So if you want to know where a plant comes from, if it's got hard leaves like this succulent, or it's got spikes on it like the cactus, and very little surface area, it's come from a hot, dry environment. If it's got long leaves like the orchid, it probably is from a more tropical environment. And the real test, or the real way of telling is, you see the little point there on the end of those leaves? That's called a drip point. So anything that's from an environment where it rains regularly, it wants the water to run off. So as the raindrops come on, it runs off and it pulls them all together into a point like that. So that's come from a tropical area, as the orchid. So if you see a foliage plant with a point like that, this is a weeping fig. That means it's come from a humid environment, somewhere where it rains regularly. But not all the time. It's not a bog plant, but it rains regularly. Now these are becoming very popular. You'll recognize these as bonsais. The original Japanese bonsais are actually outdoor plants, but we tend to not want to leave these expensive plants outside, because this is probably getting on for 5 or 6 years old. The outdoor ones at this size are probably going to be 10 to 15 years old, so we don't really want to do that. So we've ended up with a range of indoor versions, and you can see from what we're trying to do here is create a mini tree in a very small pot. You can see how shallow the pot is there. The secret of these is never let them dry out, but don't have them standing in water. So you can soak them in water if they get very dry, but put them straight on the draining board to let the excess water run away. So you could be in the dry central heating of the winter house, you might be watering twice a day, every day. Don't put them in full sunshine, because that won't help either, so a little bit of shade. A west-facing windowsill is a really good windowsill for growing houseplants on in the winter. There's a fair amount of light, they don't get scorched, but they don't dry out too quick. So where are we there? Here we go. Claire asks, our large aloe vera is in our bathroom. How often should we water it? Well, it's a succulent, so it's this sort of plant, and it will need virtually nothing during the winter. So it's fine in the bathroom. It'll cope with the humidity as long as it's not constantly sticky and wet, but not very often. Perhaps once or twice in the whole of the winter. There may not even be that. You can test by putting your finger in. If it's dry, leave it a bit longer. Christine says, I have some orange pips. I have some small plants growing. Where shall I put them over winter, and will they fruit? They may well fruit. It depends how big the orange was originally. So if it's a big edible orange like that, the tree's going to be quite big as well. Place to put them in the window is on a windowsill. West-facing windowsill will be fantastic. They need to be in pots if you've not potted them yet. They only need to be in small pots. Citrus plants love humidity, and they hate central heating. So if you've got a group of them, I put them on a tray together. I put a bit of gravel in the tray, and then keep water under the top of the gravel, and then sit the plants on it so that it's always evaporating around it. And always have a plant mister in the house. People used to use them for ironing, that's all built into the irons now, but a regular misting once or twice a day on citrus will be so beneficial for them. And you may get fruit. Keep them in fairly tight pots as they get older, and prune them regularly, and you'll certainly get flowers, and you may get fruit. The citrus plants flower 12 months of the year, because in the places they come from, like the West Indies, or where they're grown a lot in the West Indies, there's no harsh weather. The weather stays fairly constant all the year round, temperature-wise, so they can actually produce flowers all year round. So hope that helps you there, Christine. Well, that's half an hour gone already, amazingly. So any more questions before we go? Oh yeah, one houseplant that's definitely I'm thinking for many people, lots of little projects, and one of the best one is the amaryllis, and these have become very popular this year. So in a pot like that, you get a plastic pot and you get the bulb. The thing about bulbs, whether it's tulips or daffodils or the amaryllis in this case, everything that the plant needs is already in the bulb. So you don't have to do anything but just stick it in compost. So with an amaryllis, it's an indoor plant. It's not hardy to go outside. You can plant them directly into a pot like that without any drainage, or the pot that comes with it's got drainage in. That is a bit easier to grow. You sit them so that the top of the bulb is sticking out of the pot, and within a few weeks they start to produce these amazing long shoots. If you've never grown, never grown them before, and have these big trumpet flowers, and you could get those anytime, Christmas or onwards. They do make good Christmas present, and you can buy them early and keep them and wrap them, because until they get into compost and water, then they don't start growing. But great fun, very good with kids, because they can literally, once these shoots start to grow, they will grow at half an inch to an inch a day, and that just fascinating for anybody, large or small. So Claire asks another question. What Christmas tree lasts the longest? It wasn't Christmas to last a long time. Oh, you want? Yeah, I want a Christmas tree to last. Well, if we're talking about cut trees, Claire, the Nordman tree is the best tree. So it's AB Picea rather, Nordmanniana, and the secret with those is because the bark actually grips hold of the needle. This is the soft needle type. The scent isn't as good as the Norway spruce, but you don't get the needle shed everywhere. The real secrets, and we'll talk about it possibly next month, or then 3 weeks time, is that when you get a Christmas tree, it is a big wooden piece of cut flower. So cut the bottom off, so that, because the resin will have sealed it, stand it in a bucket of water for as many days as you can, up to a week, and it will draw up more water, and then you can bring it into the house. If you can bring it in gradually, it's better, but when you bring it into the house, it's fully loaded, and then you need to have a stand that you can keep putting water into, because a 6-foot tree will lose about a pint of water a day just from evaporation. And the nice thing about the Nordens is they do lose their needles. They're soft, they're easy to get up, and they're not as bad as the spiky ones that we grew up with, but you don't get the scent as much. So certainly think about one of those trees are much the best ones, and buy it early, because if you buy it, they won't actually save you anything tree wise by buying late, because they all get cut similar times. But if you can get it home, stand it in a bucket of water, leave it in the net, put it outside in the garden for a week, the difference is phenomenal. It's a question coming in from Rachel. What's the best conditions to keep a Hoya Bella? Mine has lost its flowers and looks unhappy, thank you. They're not that easy to get back into flower, and they can take quite a long time to reflower. They actually like it to be fairly dry, and so a period of dry can stimulate them. They'll actually grow in quite dark conditions as well, which they don't mind. So try that. High potash food as well is always good to get things into flower, so that's always fantastic. One last one here from Eleanor. No poinsettias, question mark. Not in yet. They will be in fairly soon. I'm hoping. Are those smiles? Or was that a tongue sticking out? I love poinsettias. I particularly love the pink ones, but they'll be in soon. And Christmas isn't really Christmas without poinsettias, as far as I'm concerned, but they'll be in soon. And we have a local grower for those, which is fantastic. So thanks for listening. Thanks for asking the questions. I hope that's been helpful. You can ask questions in the comments box afterwards. That we can pick those up as well. And I'm going to try and do these every 3 weeks. We'll stick to mainly gardening, because although we're moving into Christmas now, just one last thing to say is we're open as normal. The coffee shop's operating under the high standards we were operating before. Your restrictions might have varied, but if you're coming in, everything's there as normal. Lots of spacing throughout the centre, and we may all need to have a good Christmas. So even if we get stuck at home on our own, make sure you put your Christmas decorations up so that it feels a bit more normal. And we may all be sharing Christmas on Zoom or something like that. We may bring the internet down on Christmas Day, but everything's in stock and you can get going. But this is primarily about gardening and what to do in your gardens. So we'll see you soon, and enjoy the next few weeks. Thanks.